Hello. Hey. So I'm going to be asking Don some questions, and then we're going to open up to you. And I'm really excited to be here tonight. And really, I think tonight is about you guys and about Don and about the culmination of Amazing, which I've read already because I got it ahead of time, to this wonderful trilogy. And I'd like to just preface the evening with two things. The first being I read a bunch of John's books, and I was in reading interviews. There was a phrase that he used called the God of small things, referring to, like, that taco stand in that town. And it made me think about being here tonight and how New York City, if you grew up in New York, if you live in New York, if you trudged from work and came here tonight, New York City still is, but used to be, like, the God of small things was on every block.
Yeah.
That hot dog stand, that shoe repair, that place. So the fact that we're all here tonight at the Strand, which is, an institution in New York, and then we're all here together, it made me feel like saying thank you, and I'm just glad to be here myself. That's number one. Number two, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how I came to become a fan of Don's work. Many, many, many years ago, I was working on TV, and my first or second television job, I was a staff writer. Staff writer is the lowest rung of the writer thing, and I was working on this show, and I had no skills, except, fortunately, the showrunner, who's a mutual friend of ours, Shane Salerno, believed that I could write. So as a result, I did a lot of writing. I rewrote scripts. I basically lived in that office and pulled, 48 billion all-nighters.
Yep.
And then as the show is starting to come to fruition, here, let me show you the trailer, or look, here's the credits, I started to see this name, Don Winslow. As you look at the credits, you're like, hey, that's me, that's you, that's you. Don Winslow, Don Winslow, Don Winslow, Don Winslow. And one day, after like the 112th straight night of being in there, I went into Shane's office. I was like, hey, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, who the fuck is Don Winslow? And can he please come here and help us? And Shane, oh, you don't understand. Don is a celebrated novelist, and And then he took a bunch of books off the shelf. You should read these books, and this is really going to help your education as a writer, blah, blah, blah. So I left his office with these books. And what I really needed was help, and I was like, you know what, fuck Don Winslow. And the books, went in the shelf, and then when the show was done, I went back to New York, because my mother always told us it was a sin to throw away a book. I took all the books, and then some years ago, still a while, but I was looking for something to read, and I think it was, anyone here read The Rise of Frankie Machine? Yeah. And I'm looking, I see this book in my shelf, and I'm like, surfing, really cool. Mafia, like it. California, like it. Crime, like it. And I read it in one sitting. And I'm somebody, it's pathetic, but I have a really hard time focusing, concentrating. I have a hard time writing. The writer has to either really invite me in or really challenge me in. And I quickly have read so many of your books. I thought the trilogy challenged me in more than welcomed me in, but all the surf noir ones I've loved. And so now I know who the fuck is Don Winslow, and I'm happy as hell to know him. You've given me a lot of pleasure to a lot of people, and I don't know if anybody here, just to finish about me, but if anyone here suffers from depression, don't raise your hand, but the things that can give you pleasure, that can make you feel all right in those moments, become really special. The Mets, broadcasts, your books, and a handful of other things. So, all that out of the way, you were a private investigator for a number of years, which is fascinating to me. And my question is this, two parts. The first is, what aspects of private investigation have aided you along the way in your career as a writer? And is there sort of a few like golden rules of private investigation that especially suit writers that you can kind of like give us for free?
Yeah, as long as we're handing stuff out. I want to give a little premise, though, first. In 1977, I moved to New York, or back to New York, to become a writer. The world quickly disagreed with that assessment, and I was starving. And I came to the Strand bookstore and applied for a job. And they offered me a job, $105 a week. But the Sutton Movie Theater on 57th and 3rd offered me $110 a week. So I took that. So my apologies to the Strand. I appreciate the offer, but the $5 meant a lot to me in those days. That extra 5 came in handy, you know. Yeah, being a PI, you know, it's never happened to me where I was sitting at my desk and a tall, leggy blonde walked in while trumpet music played. Actually, it has. It was my wife, and I had the jazz record on. But, yeah, you know, research. I think I probably use the same techniques in researching a book, or very similar techniques, that I would have used as an investigator. And most of it's pretty dull. You know, you start with documents, you start with history, and you're looking at sometimes thousands of pages of documents trying to see if you can put a pattern together. And then you go out and talk to witnesses. Now when I talk to witnesses, I'm trying to get details and color. Those days I was usually trying to elicit a confession, you know. It was a different end game, but the same sorts of techniques, you know, asking open-ended questions. You know, I always start an interview, even when I was an investigator, with the simple statement, "Tell me about it." Because then I wasn't informing the interview was informing me. Whatever was topmost on their mind would come out, you know, in what they would talk about. And so we'd use what, you know, not to get overly technical, but a reverse, upside-down pyramid structure of interview and interrogation. Go broad and then come down to the details. And then start comparing one to another. I still do that when I talk to not witnesses, but, you know, people, drug traffickers or cops or, you know, addicts or whatever. Yeah. In terms of cheap tricks, you know, there are a million of them, you know. Journalists use a lot of the same ones. My personal favorite is to say, look, I'm going to write the story anyway. I want your point of view. So give it to me because I'm here to listen. But if you don't come complaining to me afterwards that I didn't get it right, because I'm here right now.
How did you come about, because from what I understand, you didn't really have a lot of interest in writing about this subject that you've now covered so good. How did you come about the thing of like, oh, I got to write about this? And how did it begin?
Yeah, it's kind of a downer. It's not going to make you all happy, frankly. September 20th, 1998. I live in San Diego area. It's about as specific as I can be. And the first thing I do every morning is go on and read newspapers, 5 or 6 of them. And I start at 5 a.m. And my first one is the local paper, the San Diego Union Tribune, and there was a story about the massacre of 19 innocent men, women, and children at a town just across the border in Mexico where we used to go on cheap weekends. You know, we live in a very, very bicultural area where people would cross the border back and forth thinking very little of it. And I had no interest in the drug trafficking world, no knowledge of it. But I couldn't get my head wrapped around how that could possibly happen. You know, how any phenomenon could come to the point where that was conceivable. Now, sadly, you know, 10 years down the line, that was a low body count on any given day in Mexico. But at the time, it was shocking. And I started reading philosophy books. I wasn't setting out to write a novel. I was just trying to get answers. And I was reading books with the titles like The Problem of Evil. And people who know me would find this very surprising, so I'm notoriously shallow. I'm not, you know, reading philosophy books. But there were no answers there. And so then I started reading Latin American history, Mexican history, Mexican-American history, and then I started reading about drug trafficking. And the more that I researched, kind of the angrier I got. And then all of a sudden I found myself typing. And that was the beginning of a 5.5 or 6 year research and writing project that turned into a book called The Power of the Dog, which was the first one of these.
It's amazing. Power of the Dog fans here. Yeah. And then what made you continue? Because I understand that 5.5 years was rewarding, but also took a toll.
Yeah.
Your wife had commentary about your demeanor.
She did. My wife, as some people in the audience who know her know, is frank in her opinions. And she didn't want me to do another drug book. She said it made you sad and depressed and kind of a pain in the ass to be around, or more of a pain in the ass to be around, as writers usually are. Irish Catholic guilt would be the short answer to that question. I swore after Power of the Dog, that I was not going to go back to that world ever. It was too tough, too sad. And then the drug wars went into a phase, an era that we would never have imagined in our worst nightmares. None of the people who were sort of watchers of that scene, journalists and cops and other people, it was beyond comprehension. And I was sitting on the sidelines, literally, physically, on the border, safe on the American side of the border, behind my desk, writing surfing books, but watching. And people would call me, people would talk to me, and our mutual friend Shane would sometimes call and say, would you write a second book? I'd literally hang up on him. Or I'd pretend to be a pizza parlor. He'd call up and say, how about writing a sequel to Dog? And I'd yell, 40 minutes, and slam the phone down. But, and this sounds egotistical, I thought that I had the background knowledge to explain to a reader, albeit through fiction, what had happened, how we got there. And I didn't see anyone else doing it. And I started almost subconsciously writing a chronology. Every time something happened, I jotted it down. And I had a 157-page single-spaced document. And then I looked at that document, and I picked out what I thought were like the 12 most important incidents and started to build a story around that. And that became a book called The Cartel.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up living right there where you live?
Yeah. I think I was 7 published books into my career before I could quit my day job. So I was doing a lot of things, cobbling together a living. I was going to summer academic programs in Oxford and directing Shakespeare for high school students, which is an absolute dream. I'd go back to doing it again in a heartbeat. I was leading African photographic safaris, and I was doing investigative work. And I was out in San Diego, and I had a witness punk on me. A lot of my job was interviewing witnesses. And this guy didn't show, and I was going to go to the San Diego Zoo. I pull up to the zoo, and I go to buy my ticket, and I realize I don't want to be around people. So I got back in the car, and do you remember maps? We used to carry their paper things, and they've got sort of an overview and a schematic sense of an area. And I had a map. And I thought, well, I'm going to drive a road I've never driven before. One of my favorite things to do. So I did this, boom, 78 East. So I drive out of downtown Dago, San Diego, and within 40 minutes, I'm at horse ranches, cattle ranches. It was remarkable, and fell in love with it. And my wife came out shortly after, and she wanted to see it. And 5 years later, we bought this old ranch.
Yeah.
And when you say, I wanted to drive a road that I'd never driven before,
Yeah.
I suspect that there's people here, people everywhere that have the desire. I want to drive a road that I've never driven before, but then you don't drive it, and you're in the same, you're doing the same thing. Is that instinct in you something that is innate, or that you had to learn? I think I'm speaking about freedom.
Yeah.
I think it's innate, I've given that a lot of thought, Stephen. My dad was in the Marine Corps in World War II when he was 18, Guadalcanal, and came back from that experience. He would never talk to me about the tough stuff. But he basically said that he wanted to float around on the water, he's still in the Navy, read books, and this just occurred to me. Go to every zoo in Europe, which he did. And my mother was a librarian. I've often said, you know, my dad was a sailor who loved books, and my mom was a librarian who loved a sailor. And we were allowed to read anything we wanted as kids at any point in time. We're never made to go to bed if we were reading. And and the library to me, you know, because we didn't have money, so the library just opened this world up to me. You know, I'd go to my mom's library, and I not only could I travel through space, I could travel through time, you know, for free, right? You know, anywhere. Just go to those shelves. Where do you want to be? Do you want to be in Africa? Do you want to be at Gettysburg? You know, and so I would go to those places in my head thinking, you know, someday I'll go there. I'll really go there. Obviously not in a time machine, but go into those places. So I think it was trained into me as a kid, you know, be adventurous and use your imagination and get out there. And, you know, I'll always be obviously grateful for that. Yeah.
And how about in the journey of becoming a writer and then, you know, becoming to where you are now? Did you ever experience a rejection to the point of, like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore, or maybe I suck?
Yeah.
And how did you get through it?
Listen, my first book took me 3.5 years to write because I had 3 other jobs. And I'd heard Joe Wambaugh, who's since become a friend, say on the radio that he was a homicide cop in L.A. He wanted to be a writer, and so he decided to write 10 pages a day no matter what. And I thought to myself, I can't write 10, but I can do 5. And a dear friend of mine who's here tonight had said to me, why don't you, you're always talking about being a writer, why don't you actually do it? And I'm in Africa with malaria and dysentery, by a fire before dawn, sick as a dog, thinking, you better do this. You know, you might actually croak, you know. And so I started to do it. And then the first 15 publishers I sent to, including the people who have me here tonight, rejected it. And but while I was getting rejection letters, I was writing the second book in the same series because I remembered reading a statistic somewhere that said of the people who put down writer as their occupation on their tax return, 1 out of every 10,000 makes a living at it. So I have a wife, I've got a toddler, I'm cobbling together this living, and I distinctly remember saying, I truly am sorry for the other 9,999, but in this lifetime, that's my slot. So sure, and there, you know, and it took a long time for those books to start, you know, paying the bills and putting food on the table. And there were a number of times where my career was just dead in the water, you know, just flatlined. And I thought, well, I'll go back to being a safari guide. You know, I'll go back to doing investigations. But I kept writing, you know, and eventually got a couple of breaks, and so far it's working out okay, you know.
I wanted to ask you a question about your novel, The Force, if I may.
Sure.
And I was wondering, because it's a pretty, have people read The Force?
Yeah. Wow, thank you.
We should probably go to questions shortly, because I think you have a crowd that wants to know things, and I might just be
you're fun, man. I wanted to talk with you for a while. So.
The Force, when I read it, Shane's like, I need you to read this right away. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember reading it. It's a pretty unflinching portrait of corruption, like right here in New York City. And, you know, I'm not as in the pulse of things, but it's true. I know enough to know that stuff is true. And I was wondering if you encountered resistance in research or dealing specifically with police.
Less so than you'd think. Listen, I'm a police guy. I'm a pro-police guy. I don't hesitate to say it. Now, having said that, are there problems? Of course there are. Are there bad cops? Of course there are. Are there racial issues? Of course there are. But overall, I'm a pro-cop guy. I will not walk past a New York City police officer without saying thank you, by the way. They were enormously generous to me and honest with me and frank, and I was frank with them. You could write any number of great novels about police officers, and they've been done. You know, we know the guys, right? I was writing in a very, very specific story I wanted to tell about a corrupt police officer. I wanted to write a story, as sort of an update of those great 70s and 80s, you know, Serpico, Prince of the City. Bob Lucy was a friend of mine, the actual Prince of the City.
I did a play with Tree Williams.
Yeah, right. And we did a TV thing with Treat, remember?
That's right.
Yeah. You know, I loved Bob, you know. And so that's the story that I wanted to tell, and I was very upfront with people about what I was doing. You know, they were extraordinarily generous with me. Many of them are still friends, and yeah.
I want one more question.
Sure.
And because I've read up, I know that there's a difference, somewhat of a difference or adjustment between writing the trilogy and writing, like, you know, the surf noir type stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, I know that for me, it's impossible to write unless I'm in there somewhere. It's coming from me. That what forced you to write, to begin the trilogy, right, was this nagging thing about how the hell is this going to happen?
Yeah.
And so my question is, I feel like, you know, we always want to feel like we know the author, or, you know, when we're, you know, and it's always usually we're wrong in lots of ways. But, like, you know, when I read Frankie Machine, when I read The Gentleman's Hour, when I read the other couple ones, I felt like I could feel you in there. Like, you know, I could feel like, oh, this is a guy that's maybe like, he's haunted by this, or he's, and I'm wondering, where are you in the trilogy? Like, if someone had to say, like, you know, if you wanted to know something about Don from reading those 3 books, even though obviously it's not about Don, but what do you think?
Boy, I don't know. You know, there's one character that runs through all 3 books. The protagonist, Art Keller, this obsessed DEA agent. And other than my wife and son, I've spent more time with Art Keller than any other actual real human being in my life. A third of my life now with this guy, and I don't even know if I like him. I don't even know that I know him. But I think if there is my voice more directly in those books, it's definitely Keller. It's definitely through Keller we share a religious background. We share, I think, unfortunately, a sort of moral rigidity. Is that a word? Educated crowd, tell me. A kind of a tendency to see things in black and white and have a harder time with the gray areas, which I've kind of had to teach myself about. And I think sometimes that obsessiveness has caused problems in Keller's life and problems in mine, you know. And it's funny, you know, I thought I was done again after the second book because I'd resolved the major conflict that had driven the first 2 books, which is Keller and his antagonist, this drug kingpin, Adon Barrera. But then I realized, thank you, I hadn't solved the conflict of Keller versus Keller. You know, and that's when I finally decided to write this 3rd book, because I dealt with the externals, the external border, if you will, hadn't dealt with the internal border. you know, and his crossing that and whether he could come back or not. And I think really that was the real driving force of this third book. And so I knew I had to resolve him, and I don't want to ruin the book for you, you know. But there's an almost confessional moment toward the end of the book that I relate to. Yeah.
I want to make sure that people here have a chance to ask questions.
Yeah, great.
Even though I'm enjoying talking to you. Yeah. But I feel like I will have failed in my mission if I don't get you talking so much. There's something, you said something beautiful in an interview recently about how, you know, borders are what divide us, but they're also what
we have in common.
What we have in common.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you to talk about what's going on right now in America and a president who seems to have. Well, I'll let you.
You sure you want to do this? Because you know.
It's okay. I mean, this isn't just because it's a bookstore doesn't mean everyone has to agree that, you know, the wall is stupid. I just think we're at a particular time and place, you know, where you know, when I hear, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Look, the last time someone asked me a question like this was in Bryant Park. It was Reed Coleman.
Okay.
And people were literally fleeing Bryant Park as I went off on a rant. I will control myself tonight.
I already bought the book.
Yeah, they were literally running out of the park.
But
you know,
you've done all this research, so you are perhaps more qualified than me.
I'm certainly more qualified than the president to talk about this. And I've invited him to talk to me about it. It's so far it hasn't been taken up on. Well, okay, here we go. All right, off we go. I'm incensed beyond words that our president goes to the parents who have lost kids to drug overdoses, and I know some of these kids, and tell them he's going to solve this drug problem by building a wall when he knows damn well that 90-something% of these drugs come through ports of entry, legal gateways. There are 52 of them, 3 of them that really matter. His own DEA, I'm not making this up, you can look it up. DEA threat assessment reports come out every year, and every year they say the same thing. 90% of the drugs come in tractor trailer trucks or cars through those legal ports of entry. 5,000 a day. 1 every 15 seconds through the port of El Paso, for instance.
Can they be stopped?
They cannot be stopped because you would shut down commerce on the 3 busiest commercial crossings in the world. You would ruin the economy of 2 countries. Everybody knows this. In the Guzman trial recently, which got a little publicity, the drug traffickers said it. Not only the DEA, the major cocaine and heroin traffickers said the same thing. So if you think we're going to solve the drug problem by building a 2,000-mile monument to ego and willful ignorance, we will not. Second, there is no emergency at the border. If anything, it's too damn quiet. I live there. What we have now is not an invasion of people from Central America, it's a boomerang. MS-13 did not begin in Central America. MS-13, am I shouting? I'm sorry. MS-13 started in the California prison systems. It then moved to the streets of Los Angeles and then to other cities. It wasn't until President Clinton had a policy of deporting Central American convicts that it went to Central America, and now it's coming back. Are the people in that caravan gang members? No. Most of them are fleeing gang violence. Gang violence that has been funded by us. By us in the United States, by purchasing heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and to a lesser extent, marijuana. So that's a homegrown problem, born in the USA. And the other thing I'd like to say about the border, you alluded to earlier. We've been multicultural on that border since before it was a border, since Mesoamerica. There was contact between South America and Native Americans in what is now the American Southwest 1,000 years ago. There's been biculturalism between Mexicans and Anglo-Americans, if you will, forever. I live there. I can't tell you the last time I had a sandwich with bread in it. And I'm as a Western European mutt as they get, right? Irish, English, and a little French. I eat tortillas. On any given day, I might have a conversation with a neighbor about football or football. We get along. We're just fine. Thank you very much. The thing about the border, if I may, just another, is it okay? I live on an old ranch. It's a working ranch, horses and cattle and all that. And I was out on one of our fence lines out and back. Barbed wire fence to keep the cattle in. The other side of the fence are a family of Mexican ranchers up from Chihuahua. And we've been neighbors for 20 years. Now, there's a border fence there, right? It divides us. I own what I own, they own what they own. But for instance, they have 3-year-old horses. I have grass on my land that for some reason I don't understand is good for 3-year-old horses. So a few weeks every year I open the gate. And their 3-year-old horses come and I guess they're happy. I don't know why, but they are. If they have a problem on their land that I can help address on mine, I do. And vice versa. It's always worked that way. We don't even lock our doors. There's no crime invasion. I don't lock my door in case one of these ranchers around needs a drink of water or a bathroom or a beer. They know where the refrigerator is. So we do tend to think of a border as something that divides two entities, two peoples, two cultures. That's true. Of course it is. But it's equally as true that a border unites two cultures, two people, two entities. It's something we have in common. And when we look at it that way, I think we can create something quite beautiful. End of sermon. Thank you.
Don was telling me this is day 1 of it, John, so he's not burnt out yet. So I encourage you to ask crazy, probing, ask what you want to ask. You always can say no. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
While understanding, microphone never did. While understanding what a problem that NAFTA has been as far as opening up those gateways for the trucks coming in and out.
Yeah.
I have family in Mexico. They're in agriculture, import-export. And I
Right.
remember when NAFTA happened, they were so excited
Yeah.
because it gave them access to equipment that they would have never had available to them for their businesses before. Can you conceive of any possible way to tamp that down other than removal of NAFTA, which would then negatively affect the legal Mexican agriculture
Yeah. No, no.
business, outside of tamping down American appetites, which has historically never worked?
Well,
'Cause
it's historically never worked because we've approached it in the same way for 50 years, stubbornly. Look, there are problems with NAFTA, obviously, okay? And NAFTA has definitely contributed, and as some cynics call it, the North American Free Drug Trade Agreement, right? At the same time, you must know I'm very pro-Mexican, right? We will never ever approach solving the American drug problem on the production end. It's not possible. We have to approach it on the consumption end. Opioids, for instance, are always a response to pain. Thank God, by the way. That's what they're for. The word heroin comes from the German word for hero. It was created to aid wounded soldiers. It's a good thing, right? During World War II, we went down and begged the Mexicans to grow more opium because we needed it for morphine for soldiers and sailors in the Pacific. Okay? But in the United States, we make up 5% of the world's population. We use 80% of the world's opioids. Those can't all be back injuries. They can't. They're addressing other kinds of pain. And the reason I think we're not getting the answer to these problems is we're not asking the question. And the question to me is, what is the pain? And until we ask ourselves deeply and honestly, what is the pain, we will not come close to solving this problem. So for me, it's not really a technical issue of how we adjust trucks coming through, how we look at agriculture. All of that, yeah, deck chairs on the Titanic as far as I'm concerned. All right? We need to ask that question. What hurts? You know, we point fingers at Mexico. Oh, Mexico, you're corrupt. You send crime up here. If I'm on the other side of that border and someone is sending $65 billion a year to psychopathic criminals in my country who are destabilizing my society, who are responsible for 200,000 deaths, 200,000 deaths over the last 12 years, I think the criminality goes in the other direction. I'm sorry, I get crazy. Did I answer your question? I tried. Yeah.
Here and then here.
Hi, thank you very much. This is a writerly question.
Good. Everyone breathed a big sigh of relief.
Oh,
Did you?
yes. Your research.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of research goes into this, and I'm curious how you go about doing your research.
Yeah.
As somebody who is a private investigator, you obviously have those skills, but sort of the research that gets to the nuance of a story, to the nuance of character, and to the plot twist. How
Yeah,
does that
I have
all
a
happen?
very specific anal retentive way of doing research. My academic training is a historian, and I believe in history. I believe in chronology. I believe that A causes B, causes C, causes D. It's a little old-fashioned, but there you go. So I start with reading history, whatever the topic is. When I feel I've got sort of a general knowledge, then I go to journalism, and I read the best nonfiction books and the best journalism. When that starts becoming redundant, I go to documents, okay? Police reports, FBI, CIA, DEA reports, trial transcripts are great documents. When all that's assembled, and this is what I call the vacuum cleaner stage, which you also is a phrase from investigation. What you don't want to do is start drawing conclusions or start analysis too early because you subconsciously shut yourself off from possibilities. So all this is the vacuum cleaner phase. Suck up all the information you can suck up and get it in that bag. When I feel that I have enough background knowledge that I'm not going to be wasting other people's time or my time, that's when I go out to contacts and sources and people. Now, in the beginning of this trilogy, that was hard. I didn't know anybody. You know, it took years. By the time this third book came around, I knew too many damn people. I knew people I didn't want to know. You know? Seriously. And so, but I don't want to go out there and be ignorant and asking dumbass questions. I need to do my homework, another old-fashioned concept. For the nuance, most of the nuances come from the person-to-person connection, right? And it comes mostly from listening. Writers like to talk. We talk too much, as witnessed tonight from me. Listening is key. You know, I call it becoming furniture. You know how you buy a new sofa, right? And it comes into the apartment or the house, and all you see for the first 2 weeks is that sofa, right? It's new, it's different, it sticks out. After third week, it's the sofa, right? So that's part of the process, is becoming the sofa. If I'm hanging out with Latino gangs in the barrio in San Diego, after a while, I'm the sofa. If I'm with police in a precinct, after a while, I'm the sofa, you know? And you begin to hear the music. You know, the other thing is reading out loud to myself. I always read all the dialogue out loud to myself. It won't tell me where I'm right. It will tell me where I'm wrong. The bad notes will sing, you know. Once I'm through with the vacuum cleaner phase, then, if you will, to torture this metaphor, I dump that whole bag out onto a table, right? and I look at it, and then I start seeing patterns. And eventually those patterns will become the structure of the book. Did that answer the question you asked me?
Hey, did I space out? She's next, but did I space out the part? Did you explain how you become the sofa?
I didn't. Someone introduces you to somebody else, and you ask, can I go talk to them? And you go talk to them, and then you hang out, and they introduce you to somebody else, and then you're on the scene. So it could be a cop bar. It could be a certain park in San Diego. It could be a prison. It could be a law office. And you hang out, and you go out, and you have drinks, or you have lunch, or you have coffees. And you're a person, but you always are very honest about what you're doing. Like, I am here to write a novel. I'll protect your identity. I will fictionalize it, but I'm here to get information. I'm here to get nuance. Don't be deceived. I never, by the way, take notes, and I never record.
Hi. First, I've read most of your books, and I want to thank you for writing them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for reading them. I haven't read most of my books, so I'm
Neil Carey
impressed by
books
you.
coming?
Huh?
Any more Neil Carey books coming?
There might be some surprises in the offing. That's all I can say about
That's
that.
my real question is,
Yeah.
how closely or is the trilogy modeled on El Chapo? Is that coincidental that he's Sinaloa, you're Sinaloa?
No, certainly not coincidence. You all hear the question, how closely is the character in the trilogy based on El Chapo Guzman? First of all, and I don't mean to be offensive or critical, I kind of reject the El Chapo nickname because it's a cutesy, Disney-esque name for a mass murderer. Oh, did you? Okay, yeah. Well, look, the first third of the trilogy, Power of the Dog, is not about him at all. It's more based on the Tijuana cartel and some other characters, principally the Arellano Felix family. When I came to write The Cartel, in order to account for what was happening in Mexico, you had to account for the Sinaloa cartel. They were the driving engine of all of that. And so while the character was not drawn from him, it was a continuation of the character from the first book, most of his actions were, yes, drawn from Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel. Okay? Yeah. Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
Easy one. What was the most fun book to write?
What was the most fun book to write? Wow. Savages was pretty fun. Just because I kind of didn't care, The first line started off as a memo to an editor. That's the truth. The first line, for those of you who don't know, of a book I did called The Savages consists of 2 words. The second word is you, and first word is not. That. I was just in a pissy mood, you know what I mean? I was one of those days when I felt like my career was standstill, so why not? And all of a sudden, I find myself writing in the voice of a 26-year-old Orange County woman, which I am not, rather obviously, I hope. That was fun. But look, I think that people often ask me, what's your favorite book? And my answer is always, and I mean it, the one I'm writing now. You know what I mean? You got to dance with the woman you're in love with.
Sir, you were...
There's a lot of interesting writing being done by people who are writing for series on various platforms, Hulu and HBO and so
Sure.
forth. I'm curious about what writers or what series you find particularly attractive and why.
Did y'all hear the question? We were talking about series on, boy, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. It's funny, we're having this conversation somewhere earlier today, and I forget where. I'm so tired. But look, I think when you look at these series, I think you got to go back to things like Hill Street Blues, which begat NYPD Blue. And then we have a long hiatus, and then we get The Sopranos and The Wire, which are, to me, absolutely iconic pieces of work. Today, the last sort of series I followed was something called Mozart in the Jungle, which I loved and didn't expect to. My guilty pleasure right now is something called Vikings, which is a lot of sword swinging and grunting and things. But I kind of learned something about Vikings. Didn't know anything about Vikings. I've been watching Ozark, which I like. I loved Babylon Berlin, so I found it very complex. That's about it. Having said that, I don't have the time to watch a lot. And sadly, I don't have the time to read a lot. 90% of my reading's research reading.
How about creating a series around Boone Daniels? I think that's a no-brainer. There's still all these East Coast people that we have this whole fantasy about the West Coast.
I know.
Fantasy about surfing and good story and character.
Listen, I've always thought Boone Daniels is a San Diego PI surfer that I wrote after I did Power of the Dogs. I needed a break, and I could call going to the beach work. No, babe, I'm working. Surfing today. Did you ever tell a story about the story conference at NBC? Supposed to have a story conference with the head of development at NBC. It's going back some years, and I spaced it off. And I'm out surfing at San Onofre on the biggest day of the year, and I get my ass kicked, right? It's way above my skill level. I'm getting drilled. And I come in out of the water, and I'm laying down, face down on a towel, gasping, trying to get some oxygen back, and my cell phone rings. And I hear this woman say, "Mr. Winslow, you're ready for your conference call?" Oh, shit. Yeah, I'm ready. So I get on the phone, and it's the head of NBC with his cupbearers in the room. And he says, "What's that sound?" Because it's going off like cannons, right? Boom, boom. And I said, "Oh, those sound machines, those environment things you put in your office? That's what it is." He says, "Can you turn it down?" No, I'm at the beach, But it was to talk about Boone Daniels as a series.
That would be a great series. You would love. I would love it.
I would too.
Work on it.
Would you?
Yes.
I can make that.
I pitched it to Shane once.
Did you?
I did, but he always wants me to do some other thing.
What's you do darker?
I don't know. He said,
Yeah.
This isn't about me. But I think it'd be great.
Listen, if you would write it, if I could get Pulitzer Prize winning playwright to write this, it's a deal. Let's do it. You all heard it. You all heard the man. Starting it here tonight. I'm making the calls first thing in the morning.
This gentleman has a question, but I have to ask you. You said something that I thought was really beautiful about how the ocean and surfing was a great counterpoint to your work
Yeah.
as a writer.
Yeah.
And I think, how many people are writers out here, or aspiring writers?
Quite a few, yeah.
Like, we need the thing that's the opposite.
Yeah.
Can you just?
Yeah, look, all day we create our own world, right? We sit there and our characters are more or less going to say what we tell them to say. They're more or less going to do what we tell them to do. We can invent the world where these little demigods at a keyboard, right? Then you get out in the ocean, and the ocean doesn't care what you've written. The ocean doesn't care what script you have in mind for how it's going to go today. You're this puny little thing. It doesn't know you're there. It doesn't care. It's going to do its own thing, and you deal with it. And I think that's extremely healthy for writers who are used to sitting there, and writing dialogue. You writers in this, you know this. Confess, you're guilty. You want to write everyone else's dialogue in real life, right? You go home to your wife, I have my lines for me. I have her lines for her. She doesn't play that, though, It's very frustrating, sort of like the ocean, It's a terrible thing. I think there's the siren coming. Sir.
Mr. Winslow, it's great
It's
to
Don,
meet you.
by the way. Nice to meet you.
I'm also excited. I heard that The Force is going to be in the film.
I heard that too.
So I'm really excited to do that. But what are your thoughts about Hollywood not having a lot more based on the books? It's more like, it's not much. I mean, I would love to see all your books to be in a film, but,
Thank you and good night. It's been a real pleasure. Stephen, thank you so much. Look, making a movie's hard. It's hard. There's so many strings that have to come together at once. making good movies even harder. I am not one of these novelists who looks down on screenwriters, for instance. I think it's an extremely difficult thing to do. Adaptation, I think, is even harder to do. So look, I mean, I agree with you. I wish all of my things had been made into movies and TV, but that's not the real world. I've had some really bad experiences. I've had some good experiences. Yeah, that's life. That's life.
Our friend produced and I think co-wrote Savages.
Yeah.
And talk about how hard it is. He told me one day about just location scouting when you drive around with Oliver Stone. Just being in the car with Oliver Stone. And Shane is someone who's never smoked and he never drinks. He's one of those guys.
You're going to tell the story, aren't you?
And he said Oliver Stone is just smoking blunts, and then Shane's like, Oliver, you're my favorite, and I have to tell you, please do not smoke marijuana in this car. Yeah. Stop over here to the whorehouse, to this and that. And that's just a location scouting, But he did. I thought they did a great job. I enjoyed that movie.
Why didn't Don Winslow show up tonight? Where is he? Oh. That was a day, man. That was a.
You were there too.
Oh yeah, I was there when I was in the front passenger seat, and Shane's driving, of course, and Oliver and his assistant are in the back, and Oliver would say things like, "Shane, slow down, I'm missing everything. Shane, speed up, we don't have all day," right? And we're in the middle of the PCH, Pacific Coast Highway, in downtown Laguna Beach, and Shane turns 180 degrees away from the steering. Goes, "I can speed up or I can slow down. I can't do both at the same time." And I'm grabbing the wheel. It was a brutal day, man. And Stone would say, Don, what? I don't do Oliver Stone imitation. I'm not going to try. He said, "What would a money launderer's house look like?" Oh, I'll take you to one. That's what it looks like. No, it doesn't. Yeah, it does. He's in there. It was like, it was, yeah, that's why, basically. My favorite ever location story, the producer said to me, "Can you find me a remote mountain cabin?" Yes, I can. Drive him 20 miles out, show him a remote mountain cabin, and he says, it's one of my two favorite ever Hollywood lines, said, "Can you find me a remote mountain cabin closer to town?" By definition, no. And you know why I'm going to hell?
Tell me.
It's a Hollywood story. Do you have a second? I did a favor for a buddy of mine whose wife was pregnant, and he didn't have health insurance. And the way to get health insurance is to write a script, and then you get health insurance. And so we did, and sold it. It was a script called Dojo Wars, right? I took the plot of the Iliad and turned it into a martial arts movie. It's about an unborn child. Give me a break. So we send in the script. You've had these moments. I know you have. The executive at a studio who shall go nameless, who bought a script called Dojo Wars, writes a note. I hate the word note now. I hate it. Ready? What's a dojo? This is why I'm going to hell now. All right? I'm so ashamed of this. I wrote a line that no director would ever shoot, no self-respecting actor would ever say. It's two martial arts instructors on a beach. This is so awful. One says to the other, "Let's go back to the dojo, the place where we teach martial arts." So if the nuns were right, I'm going to hell.
I had a play of mine that was going to be done and the play was about recovery. Yeah. 12-step. Yeah. And they bought it. The whole thing. We're going on with a boom, and then they look at the script, and then the note was like, "This is great. We love it. It's going to be great. Does it have to be about recovery?" Who's next? Yes, sir. And then you email.
We only have time for one more question.
Why don't we give her that question? Why don't we give?
But we're having so much fun.
Okay, yeah, we can do these two.
I'll try to keep mine short. One of the things I loved the most about The Cartel, which is an absolute masterpiece, was the portrait of all of the individual states in Mexico. I'm just wondering if there was one state in particular that holds a special place in your heart as a writer and as a person.
Yeah, probably Baja, because that's where I live in Cali. And so I used to be down there a lot. I helped build a school in Tijuana. So I Baja. Is that the question you asked me? You look puzzled.
No, maybe.
Baja
I
Norte.
was thinking about in connection with the actual book. I mean, I'm trying to think of how much was written about
No,
Baja.
in Cartel, not
Yeah.
much. In Dog, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, personally, the Ciudad Juarez.
Juarez.
Yeah,
we all have a
of
great
course.
fondness for
Yeah.
Juarez. I was talking to my buddy Tom Russell. Tom, the great singer-songwriter who writes a lot about Juarez, and we were reminiscing about that. There's a great song called "When Sinatra Played Juarez." You look it up sometime. It's great. Thank you.
You said, you tweeted this was going to be your last book on the drug war.
I did.
So what makes you think you're not going to have anything more to say on what's happening next? Because, sure as hell it's not over yet.
Yeah. Look, I'm really done this time.
Well, you said it before.
I've said it before, and I wasn't lying. I was wrong.
It doesn't look like
There's a
it.
difference. There's a difference. Look, it's been a third of my life, and it's been a tough topic. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the people that I spent time with aren't with us anymore. They're behind bars or they died. And I have never made including last night at the opening of this tour, a single appearance anywhere on any of these books where someone in the audience has not come up to me to talk about a loved one who was killed in the drug wars or died of an overdose or who's serving life in prison. I don't want to end this on a downer. Do you know what I mean? I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. I think that the way I've phrased this, and I think I'm right, is that I'm leaving the drug wars with the knowledge, however, that the drug wars will never leave me, really.
Thanks for everything you've been writing about it.
It's very gracious of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.